The night begins with smoke, thick, greasy, and clinging to your throat as if it means to stay there forever. You wake on damp ground, half buried in ash, your ears still ringing from the clash of metal and the roar that followed. The village you knew, a handful of huts, the steady smell of pine and bread, the distant bleat of goats, is now a smear of black silhouettes against an orange horizon. The air tastes like iron. Somewhere in the distance you hear laughter, low, guttural and foreign. Viking laughter. They've come in their dragon-proud ships again, slicing through fog like blades through silk, hungry for the same things they always are: silver, glory, and women. You probably won't survive this, most don't. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You can almost feel the heat of their torches before you see them. The ground trembles beneath heavy boots and shields, painted faces gleaming in the firelight like demons carved from wood. A few of the men from your village tried to fight. They always do. But you see what's left of them now. The Vikings don't simply kill, they make an example of resistance. Limbs splayed, mouths frozen open, bodies left where they fell so the survivors understand what happens when you stand in the way of raiders who answer only to their gods. They move like a tide, organise chaos. The berserkers lead, half naked and painted in streaks of ash, eyes glazed with something between madness and devotion. Behind them come the Jarls and their men, barking commands, dragging captives toward the shore where the longships wait like waiting beasts. You try not to look, but your eyes find them anyway. Women pulled by their hair, children thrown aside, old men left to burn in their homes. It's hard to tell whether the screams belong to others or are simply echoing in your head. And then comes the chanting, slow, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. You realise it's not a song of grief but of triumph. For them this isn't cruelty, it's ceremony. Fire and blood are how they consecrate the world. Victory is Odin's, one shouts, his voice rising over the crackle of burning roofs. You wonder, briefly, if Odin is listening, and if he's ever satisfied. Historians still argue whether Viking raids were acts of sheer savagery, or part of a more calculated economic system. Trading, raiding, and enslaving, all blurred together. The truth, like smoke, drifts somewhere between. What's certain is that every conquest left behind not just bodies but stories, some told, most buried. The men returned home with silver and slaves, the women left behind with nothing but the echo of oars fading into fog. And yet, even in this chaos, the Vikings themselves believed in fate. Weird, the thread spun by unseen hands. Maybe that's why they raided so fearlessly. To them, death wasn't an ending. It was a kind of glory, a ticket to Valhalla. But for you, watching your world collapse under foreign fire, it doesn't feel glorious. It feels endless. As the smoke thickens, a hand grabs your wrist. Someone whispers your name, a neighbour, a friend, maybe even one of the fallen's wives. Her eyes are wide, her hair matted with soot. She points toward the woods, toward the dark where the flames can't reach. You run together, barefoot, silent, every breath sharp and cold. Behind you, the chanting grows fainter, the smell of burning wood fades into pine and frost. When you finally stop, you're shaking, not from cold but from knowing the world you knew is gone. The Vikings don't just take land, they take order. Tomorrow they'll come for what's left, grain, gold and women. And you'll learn what happens when the warriors fall and their wives are left behind. But that's tomorrow. For now, all you can do is breathe, hide, and listen to the sound of distant oars as the north claims another piece of the world. Morning comes quietly, as if ashamed to reveal what's left. The smoke has thinned, drifting lazily over what used to be a village. Crows move first, hopping, pecking, their black feathers slick with dew and soot. You watch them from the tree line half hidden behind the bark of a birch, your breath shallow enough not to betray you. The fires are still smouldering. The men who once guarded these homes are gone, some to Valhalla, most to ash. What remains are the women, the children, the too old and the too young, and in the eyes of the Vikings that means spoils. You hear the laughter again, closer this time. A group of warriors is moving among the ruins, lifting doors from their hinges, kicking aside the fallen. One carries a silver necklace torn from a neck you can't see. Another drags a bundle of furs. They're not just looting, they're dividing life itself. When the warriors die, the women become the next currency. The Vikings call it thrall, slavery, but that word doesn't carry the full taste of it. It's not just work they demand, it's presence, it's proof of victory. You remember how your mother used to talk about the gods of the north, how they rewarded courage and punished weakness. Odin with his missing eye. Freya, goddess of love and war, who wept for lost husbands but also took lovers from the battlefield. Maybe that's the cruelest irony. The Vikings believed they honoured their gods by taking everything from others. When a warrior fell, his wife might follow him into death, or worse, be claimed by his conqueror as a mark of triumph. To them, it wasn't cruelty, it was inheritance. Historians still argue whether Viking society was more brutal than its contemporaries, or simply more honest about what power meant. Anglo-Saxon chronicles called them devils in human form. Norse sagas, however, portrayed them as men of destiny. Violent, yes, but guided by a higher purpose. Both can be true. What's certain is that the wives of the defeated never stood outside that story. They were part of its grammar, its punctuation of conquest. A few of the women are being herded toward the shore. You can see them now, faces streaked with ash, dresses torn, eyes blank with shock. Some cling to their children, others walk stiffly, like they've already left their bodies behind. One Viking shouts something in his language, rough, almost playful, and slaps a captive on the back as though congratulating her on surviving. Another laughs and raises his cup. It's not wine, you realise, but blood mixed with ale. They call it the blot, a blood offering. In their minds, victory isn't complete until the gods have had their share. Sometimes that meant animal sacrifice, sometimes it didn't. You try not to imagine what the next offering might be, and then, like a strange counterpoint to the horror, you notice one of them. A tall man with braided hair, his armour scratched and dark with soot, kneeling beside a woman who's fallen. He's not shouting, he's speaking softly, words you can't quite catch, and for a fleeting second it looks almost human. Even compassion in this world feels like violence waiting to bloom. You think of your husband, how he went to the fight clutching a dull axe and a prayer. You wonder if he fell quickly, or if he still lies among the bodies. You want to go to him, but you know better. The Vikings haven't finished claiming their trophies yet. Later you'll learn that some women are taken north, sold in markets that smell of salt and fish. Others are married off to their captors, their names changed, their pasts erased. Some bear children who will never know which blood runs in their veins, the conquered or the conquerors. A few, perhaps, will find small mercies in those new lives. Most will not. You pull the cloak tighter around your shoulders and sink deeper into the forest, where the ground is cold and soft with moss. You tell yourself that survival is its own rebellion, that if you keep breathing, keep remembering, something of your people remains. But when you close your eyes, you see the flames again, licking the edges of the sky, and realise survival isn't the opposite of loss. It's another version of it. By the second night, the smell of the sea reaches you before the sound of it. The Vikings have gathered by the water's edge, their longships pulled halfway onto the sand like resting beasts. You stay hidden among the dunes, peering through the tall grass, trying to understand the pattern in their chaos. There is rhythm to what they do, ritual disguised as brutality. For every raid, there must be a feast. For every victory, a ceremony. And for every dead warrior, there must be a claim made upon the living. Torches rise along the shore, their light flickering against the hulls of ships painted with dragons and serpents. The women are brought forward, one by one. You can't hear words clearly, but you can feel the tone, the laughter, the shouts, the drumbeat beneath it all. This isn't celebration, it's theatre. Each woman is placed before the chieftain, who decides her fate as casually as one might choose a horse or a drinking horn. Some are handed to specific warriors as brides of victory. Others are bound to be sold later in distant markets. A few are forced into mock weddings, ceremonies designed not for union, but for dominance. The Vikings believed that taking a woman after battle pleased the gods who granted them triumph. A strange, twisted echo of fertility, victory giving birth to possession. They called it brudlaup, a marriage of war. The rites mimic real weddings. The groom drinks from a horn, the woman's hair is covered, oaths are spoken. But everyone knows it's theatre. She's not a wife, she's a warning, a living reminder to all who might resist next time. Historians still argue whether these rituals were widespread or exaggerated by Christian chroniclers who wanted to paint pagans as monstrous. The truth, again, lies in the fog between bias and blood. What can't be denied is that these ceremonies existed in some form, echoes of them found in runestones, sagas and burial relics. The difference between ritual and cruelty is often a matter of who's holding the torch. You see one woman resist, a chieftain's daughter maybe. She spits in the face of her captor and screams something that sounds like a curse. The men laugh. One grabs her by the hair and drags her toward the ship. Another lifts a horn to his lips and shouts to the sky, offering her defiance as part of the feast. For them, her rage only deepens the flavour of victory. You watch until she disappears into the shadows between hulls, the waves swallowing her screams, and then the drums begin. Deep, slow, heavy as heartbeats. The men dance around fires, tossing scraps of bread and meat into the flames. The women are made to watch. Some stare blankly. Others look toward the horizon where the moon sits low, pale and indifferent. You can almost hear the thoughts flickering behind those faces. If the gods are watching, do they care? One of the Vikings approaches the captives with a small bowl filled with water from the sea. He dips his fingers and marks their foreheads with it, muttering something in Old Norse. Baptism, of a sort, but not the Christian kind. To them this is purification, an initiation into servitude. Now they belong to the sea, you hear one say, and the others cheer. It's strange. How ceremony can make even cruelty look orderly. You've been crouched too long. Your legs ache, your hands tremble. The wind off the water cuts through your clothes, sharp with salt and cold. You realise with sudden clarity that these men see themselves not as villains but as instruments of destiny. To them, the wives of the slain are the final act of war, living trophies that sing their victory louder than any song. As the fires burn lower, the drums fade into the slow crash of waves. You watch the captives disappear onto the ships, their silhouettes framed by orange light and smoke. You know that when dawn comes, they'll be gone, carried north to strange lands and stranger fates. You want to scream, but the night is too wide, too full of ghosts. So you press your forehead to the cold sand and whisper the only prayer left to you, that the gods, if they exist, have room for those who never chose their battles. You stay hidden for 2 days after the ships depart. The world is strangely quiet now, only the crackle of what's still burning, the soft groan of trees that have seen too much. You move cautiously through what's left of your village, stepping over broken pots, scorched tools, bones that might have been animal once but aren't anymore. And then you find her. A woman in torn leathers, her hair matted with ash and blood, a sword still gripped in her hand. A shield maiden. She's young, maybe your age, maybe younger, and dead with her eyes open toward the sky, as if still searching for a god that never answered. You kneel beside her and touch the hilt of her sword. It's heavier than you expect, worn smooth by hands that must have swung it with purpose. You've heard stories of women like her, warriors who chose battle over bondage, who'd rather die on the field than be taken as someone's prize. Men sang about them in the mead halls, calling them Valkyries, the choosers of the slain. But here, in the mud and silence, there's nothing mythical about her. She was flesh and breath and choice. Historians still argue whether shield maidens truly existed, or if they were poetic inventions, symbols of a freedom women rarely had. Archaeologists have found graves with weapons buried beside female remains, but debate whether those belong to warriors or simply wealthy women honoured with their husbands' tools. What's certain, though, is that someone like this woman believed she was meant to fight, and belief, when you have nothing else, is its own kind of weapon. You carry her sword for a while, though you don't really know why. Maybe it's hope, maybe guilt, maybe you just want to feel something other than fear. The air smells like rain now, and with it comes the sound of hoofbeats. You freeze. A small party of men on horseback, Vikings again, stragglers, searching for survivors or spoils left behind. You hide in the hollow of a burned hut, heart pounding so loudly you're certain they'll hear it. They stop near the body of the shield maiden. One dismounts, prods her with his boot, and laughs. "Braver than the rest," he says in his rough accent. "Pity she wasted it." The others laugh too. They talk about her beauty, her defiance, the way she must have fought. One of them jokes that she would have made a fine bride if she'd known when to yield. You feel your stomach twist. In their world, courage in a woman isn't admired. It's something to be punished, or at best possessed. When they leave, you crawl out and sit beside her again. The rain starts to fall, washing the soot from her face. You whisper, "You won, in your way," though you're not sure she'd agree. You bury her the best you can, covering her with dirt and stones until the ground looks almost peaceful. For a moment, you wonder if this is what she wanted, to be remembered not as someone's wife or prize, but as herself. Later that night, by the glow of a dying ember, you think about all the women who never got that choice. The ones who surrendered because survival sometimes demands it. The ones who took their own lives rather than face what came next. There were stories even before this raid of women who leapt into the sea rather than be taken north, entwining their fate with the waves, choosing water over chains. Some said Freya carried their souls herself. Others said their ghosts haunted the fjords, whispering warnings to those who came after. You lie awake and wonder what you'd do if they came again. Could you fight? Could you end your own story before someone else did? Or would you, like so many before you, simply endure, living long enough to remember? You don't know yet. But as the rain washes away the ash, you start to feel something unfamiliar stirring beneath the grief. It isn't hope exactly. It's defiance, quiet and steady. The kind that waits, learns, and survives long enough to be dangerous later. By the time you reach the coast again, the air has changed. It smells not of death, but of trade, of salt, smoke, and the faint tang of tar from shipbuilders' hands. The harbour at Hedeby is alive, crowded with people who speak a dozen languages you don't understand. The Viking ships you saw burning villages now float peacefully at the docks, their sails folded like wings at rest. You realise, with a kind of slow horror, that the same men who raided your home now haggle here in broad daylight, laughing, drinking and selling what they took, including people. You blend into the crowd as best you can. Traders from Frisia, slaves from the east, women from the British Isles with hair like yours. No one looks twice. The market hums with the sound of silver coins clinking against wood. You follow the noise to the centre square where it happens openly. The auction of flesh. Captives stand in rows, wrists bound, while merchants circle them with the practised eye of buyers inspecting livestock. A man with a red beard calls out bids in a voice that carries over the wind. Behind him, you see one of your own people, a young girl with a burn scar on her cheek, sold for less than a barrel of mead. They don't hide the cruelty here. They call it commerce. And in the Norse tongue, there's a word for it. Threll, meaning slave, servant, or property. But it's more complex than that. A thrall could be traded, freed, or even rise in status if they pleased their masters. Some earned their way into households, even marriages. Others were used until they broke. Historians still argue whether this system was purely economic or something darker, an ideology woven into the Viking worldview where power was proven by ownership. A merchant approaches you, his eyes scanning your face as if measuring its worth. You look away quickly, pretending to be one of the trader's helpers, and drift toward a row of stalls selling amber beads and carved bone charms. You overhear a conversation between two men. One boasts that he bought an Irish woman for silver, another that he sold a Christian wife to a chieftain who wanted to humiliate her dead husband's clan. They laugh, sip ale, and argue about prices as if discussing grain. You try to imagine what happens next for the women who stand on that platform. Some will be shipped north to serve in halls of timber and smoke, bearing children who won't know their mother's language. Others will be sold again, traded between masters like coins worn smooth with use. A few, just a few, will find ways to twist their fate. History remembers one, Melkorka, an Irish princess enslaved by a Norse trader, who pretended to be mute for years until she rose in her captor's household and taught her son the speech of kings. Her silence became strategy. You feel a strange pull between disgust and understanding. The Vikings were merchants as much as marauders, their entire empire floating on the exchange of bodies and goods. Their silver coins, found buried across Europe, are stamped not just with kings' faces but with the weight of lives they bought and sold. And yet, standing in this market, you see no guilt, only business. The afternoon wind picks up, carrying the calls of gulls over the murmur of trade. You notice one woman staring back at you from the platform, her eyes steady, unblinking. She doesn't cry or plead. She simply watches, as though memorizing the faces around her. You recognize that look. It's the same one you wore when you hid in the forest, when you buried the shield maiden. It's the look of someone who refuses to vanish, even when stripped of everything else. You stay until the sun begins to set, the sea turning molten gold behind the ships. The crowd thins, the laughter fades, and still you stand there, the image of those bound wrists burning into your mind. You wonder if any of the buyers see what you see, that every woman they chain is another ember waiting for wind, and the north, for all its frost, has never been short on fire. Weeks pass before you dare to travel inland again. The forests grow quieter as winter begins to creep across the land, branches rimmed with frost, rivers crusting over in silence. You follow an old trade path back toward the settlements that once belonged to your people, now ruled by those who killed them. It's there, among the grey timber halls and smoke-filled hearths, that you learn what becomes of the wives of the slain. In this new order, grief is not permitted to last long. The Norse law, so precise in its sense of ownership, declares that a dead man's wife can be inherited by his kin, or even by his killer, if no heir claims her. She becomes fylgja, a kind of attached spirit, passed along with property and cattle. It's not just about lust, it's about control. To them, a household without a woman is chaos. So the conquerors keep what steadies the home, even if she trembles every time the door opens. You find one of these women, Astrid, living in a chieftain's hall not far from where your village once stood. You recognize her instantly. Her husband fell defending the harbour, his axe splintered against a Viking shield. Now she wears the wool dress of a Norse wife, her hair braided in their style, her voice measured and polite. When she sees you, her eyes flash with something between recognition and warning. Later, when the hall quiets, she whispers the truth. They think I've accepted it. But every word I speak is a knife I hide in plain sight. She explains how the system works. The captors don't call it slavery, they call it binding through duty. A woman taken as a widow's replacement keeps the house, tends the fire, and warms her new master's bed. In return, she's fed, clothed, and, in the cruelest twist, sometimes even protected from worse fates. If she bears children, the old bloodlines blur, her past slowly rewritten in the language of her captors. Some women go silent, letting the world forget who they were. Others, like Astrid, remember and wait. Historians still argue whether these forced unions were exceptions or common practice. Norse sagas, written later under Christian influence, often soften the truth, calling them marriages of peace, meant to heal divisions after battle. But archaeology paints a grimmer picture. Graves of foreign women have been found beside Viking warriors, sometimes buried alive or bound at death. Scholars debate whether this was ritual or murder. Perhaps, as with most things in the north, it was both. At night, you sit beside Astrid in the longhouse while men drink and boast of raids. Their laughter fills the smoky air, thick with mead and arrogance. A skald, a poet hired to entertain, recites a tale of conquest, his voice rising over the crackle of the hearth. The story celebrates a hero who takes a rival's wife as his prize, calling her his peace gift from the gods. The men cheer, slam their cups, and demand more verses. Astrid keeps her face still, but her hand tightens on her spindle until her knuckles go white. When the fire dies down, she tells you something that chills you more than the snow outside. They don't think they're cruel, she says. They think they're maintaining order. That the gods demand balance, and that balance is obedience. She looks at you then, her eyes hard as iron. But order breaks eventually. You stay a few more nights, helping her mend clothes, tending the fire, pretending to belong. You watch how she moves, graceful, controlled, always listening. She knows the habits of her captors, who drinks too much, who leaves keys near the door, who prays before bed. Every small observation is a map. You survive by becoming invisible, she murmurs. And then, when they finally stop looking, that's when you strike. As dawn bleeds pale through the cracks in the roof, you understand what she means. Survival isn't just endurance, it's slow rebellion. These women, branded as spoils, are rewriting the very laws meant to break them. Their weapons aren't swords or shields, but silence, memory and time. You leave before anyone wakes, carrying Astrid's words like a hidden blade. The snow deepens as you head north, tracing the paths of men who once called themselves God's messengers. Monks and priests, mostly from the British Isles, now wander through these same lands clutching wooden crosses, preaching to men who believe in Thor's hammer more than Christ's wounds. You find one of their outposts, a crude chapel built beside a fjord, its walls made from ship planks and hope. Inside, candles flicker in the damp air, and the Latin hymns sound like fragile birdsong trapped in a storm. It's strange, you think, how both the pagans and the Christians claim to bring light to darkness, each convinced the other is lost. You sit at the back of the chapel, pretending to pray, listening to a priest warn his flock against the heathen ways of the north. He tells them of women taken in raids, of blood offerings, of lust dressed up as religion. The audience nods solemnly, whispering prayers for the victims. But when the sermon ends, one of the men in the front row, clad in fur and silver, slips a coin into the priest's hand and quietly asks when the next shipment of thralls will arrive. You realise then that moral outrage is easy when it's profitable. The Christian merchants denounce Viking slavery in public, but buy the same captives in private, calling it redemption. They baptise women who survived the raids, giving them new names and new sins to confess. Sometimes, they even sell them back to the Norse elite as converted wives, purified by faith. The cruelty doesn't vanish, it just changes language. Historians still argue whether the Christian missionaries who came to Scandinavia genuinely sought to protect women, or merely to rebrand them. The sagas record priests condemning pagan rites, human sacrifices, concubinage and widow burnings, yet many of these same priests took concubines of their own, claiming it was to guide heathen souls. Even sin, it seems, can be sanctified with enough scripture. Outside the chapel you meet one of these women, a Saxon girl no older than 16, her head shaved as a sign of devotion. She tells you her name used to be Alwyn, though now they call her Anna. "It sounds holier," she says softly. She tends the candles, scrubbing soot from the altar, singing hymns she doesn't understand. "They say I'm saved," she murmurs, "but I just changed cages." Her eyes linger on the horizon where the longships glide, black against the silver sea. You walk with her down to the shore where broken oars and driftwood form makeshift crosses. She points to one, small, carved with runes. "A Norseman made that for me," she admits, half smiling. "Said his gods would protect me if mine didn't." She pauses, her breath clouding in the cold. Maybe both abandoned us. You think about Astrid's words, how order breaks. Maybe this new religion is just another form of order, another hand pressing down on those who can't fight back. The Norse claim divine right through strength. The Christians claim it through salvation. Either way, women end up on their knees. That night, you stay in the chapel. The priest leads evening prayers, his voice echoing against the rough wood. He preaches that Christ loves the meek, that the pure will inherit heaven. But outside, you can still hear the distant music of a Viking hall. Laughter, drums, the clang of goblets. Pagan or Christian, conqueror or convert, the rhythm of power sounds the same. When the candles burn low, Anna, slips you a piece of bread wrapped in cloth. "For the road," she whispers. You thank her, but she shakes her head. "No," she says quietly, "for remembering me." And you do. As you walk away, the chapel fades into mist, its hymns dissolving into the same wind that carries the smell of mead and smoke from the next village. The two worlds overlap like old ink on parchment. Faith bleeding into blood, salvation into servitude. In that blur, you understand the cruel symmetry. One side worships gods that demand sacrifice. The other worships a god who died from it. And the women caught between, they become the bridge both sides trample to reach heaven. You follow the fjord inland, where the mountains rise like grey teeth and winter presses hard against the land. Word travels faster than ships, and by the time you reach the next settlement, people already whisper about the southern woman who outsmarted her captor. You find her story curling around firesides like smoke, half legend, half warning. Her name, they say, is Ingrid, though no one knows if that's her real one. Some call her witch, others queen. Either way, she's the one who rose from ruin. You hear the tale first from a trader, a man missing 2 fingers and most of his pride. "She was taken same as the rest," he says, chewing dried fish between his words. "But she didn't break. She learned." He leans closer, eyes glinting with a mixture of awe and fear. "They say she started by tending her master's hall, watched him, watched his wife, watched everyone." Within months she spoke their language. Within a year she managed the household. Within 2 the master's wife was dead, and Ingrid wore her keys at her belt. You meet her, by accident or perhaps fate, at a winter market. She stands taller than most, wrapped in furs, her hair bound in silver wire. Her eyes are cold, calculating, but not unkind. When she speaks to the merchants, her tone carries command. No one dares question her price. You realise, with quiet awe, that she's done the impossible, turned her captivity into currency. She sees you watching, and smiles faintly, as if recognising something of herself in your stare. "You survived," she says simply. It's not a question. That night, you share a cup of mead with her near the hearth. She tells you, without apology, how she played the long game. "Men like to think power is loud," she says, her voice low, "but real power whispers." It waits. She learned the rhythms of her captors, their feasts, their rituals, their tempers. She flattered the men who mattered, healed the ones who bled, and made herself indispensable. "When they think they can't live without you," she adds with a smirk, "you've already won." Historians still argue how much influence women like Ingrid truly had in Viking society. Sagas speak of queens who advised kings, seeresses who shaped decisions through prophecy, and concubines who became mothers of dynasties. Yet scholars can't decide if these tales were exaggerations or reflections of a subtler truth, that women found power not in open rebellion, but in survival. Archaeological finds, silver keys buried with women, runestones naming them as landowners, hint that such figures weren't myths at all. They were anomalies made flesh. Ingrid talks about the other captives too, those who didn't rise, who never got the chance. "I learned from their silence," she admits. "Every time one disappeared, I became harder to erase." She reaches into her cloak and pulls out a small pendant, a tiny carved face of Freya, the goddess of beauty and war. "She's not as gentle as the priests say," Ingrid murmurs. "She weeps, yes, but her tears are for what she's about to destroy." As the fire dies, you realise that her rise is both victory and tragedy. She's free only because she learned to mimic her captors so completely that they forgot she was ever conquered. You ask if she ever feels guilt, for those left behind, for the woman whose place she took. She doesn't hesitate. "Every breath in this world costs someone else theirs," she says. "The only sin is wasting it." When dawn breaks, you see her standing by the shore, watching the sea ice drift apart. Men approach her for trade, bow slightly, wait for her nod. She commands this place now, once a slave, now a power broker in the north. Yet you sense something restless in her, a weariness that no amount of silver can quiet. You wonder if freedom won through manipulation feels any lighter than chains, but she never says. She just turns, her furs catching the sun, and disappears into the crowd like a ghost who has learned to walk among the living. You think of her long after she's gone, not as a symbol of triumph, but as proof that even in a world built to crush women, some learned to bend it, quietly, dangerously, and with a smile that could unmake kingdoms. You travel farther north, where daylight lingers like a ghost and the nights feel carved from ice. Every hall, every farmstead you pass has its own version of the stories, sung by skalds, those wandering poets who turn memory into melody and horror into legend. They sit by the fire, their voices low and rhythmic, singing of valour and vengeance, of men who fought bravely and women who waited faithfully. The verses are beautiful, almost hypnotic. But you notice what's missing. The screams, the smoke, the silence that followed. The skalds are careful. They turn pain into poetry, smoothing over the edges until blood becomes metaphor and captivity becomes romance. You listen to one of them perform in a crowded longhouse, a song about a noble chieftain who claimed the heart of his fallen enemy's wife. The crowd cheers when the woman in the tale is won, as if she's a prize, not a person. When the song ends, they toast to love, to conquest, to the gods. You sit at the edge of the hall, the heat from the fire too sharp against your skin, wondering how many in the audience were once like her. You ask the skald afterward if he believes his own stories. He laughs, stroking his frostbitten beard. "I believe in silver," he says, "and in what keeps men from feeling guilty." You almost admire the honesty. In a world built on conquest, truth is bad for business. The bards who sang of honour were paid by those who wanted to be remembered as honourable. Historians still argue about how much truth hides beneath those sagas. Were they propaganda, moral fables, or distorted echoes of real lives? Some claim their history veiled in verse, others call them outright fiction. What's undeniable is their power. The sagas outlived the people they erased. They turned atrocities into adventures, making the conquered forget and the conquerors feel righteous. You stay in that village for a few days listening to more songs. There's one about a queen who followed her husband into death, throwing herself on his pyre out of love. The women around you murmur admiration. But one older woman sitting near the door mutters, "Maybe she was pushed." No one hears her over the music, but you do. You glance her way, and she meets your eyes briefly, a flash of defiance in a sea of obedience. She doesn't say more, and she doesn't have to. You both know how stories change depending on who tells them. Later by the shore you find carvings on driftwood, scratched lines that look like runes. You trace them with your fingers and recognise fragments of a song, but not one sung in the hall. It's rawer, more personal. A woman's lament written in secret. They took my name, but not my sleep. They burned my home, but not my voice. You wonder how many verses like this were lost. Songs whispered into wind, written on wood that rotted or sank. The official stories survive because they flatter those in power. The others dissolve quietly like breath in winter air. That night, you dream of the shield maiden again, the one you buried in the ash. She stands in the hall beside the scald, listening to him sing her death as a noble fall. Her face is calm, unreadable. When the song ends, she looks at you and says, "They'll remember him forever. They won't even know I had a name." You wake with tears you didn't realise you'd shed, the echo of her voice fading into the rustle of the sea outside. You start to understand that memory is its own battlefield. The Vikings conquered with swords, but they ruled with stories. Even centuries later, those tales still glow like embers, beautiful, dangerous, and half true. Maybe that's the worst kind of victory, when even your suffering becomes someone else's legend. You sit by the dying fire, the scald song still humming faintly in your ears, and whisper to yourself, "I remember." It's small, almost nothing, but it's a beginning. The land grows softer as spring begins to thaw the north. The snow recedes from the hills, revealing grass the colour of old gold. You travel inland one last time, following stories of a burial, one unlike any other. They say a great warrior was laid to rest with his weapons, his ship, and a woman bound beside him. Some claim she went willingly, others whisper that she didn't. You want to see for yourself how truth is buried in this cold soil. The mound rises above the fjord, silent except for the sighing wind. The ship lies there still, half rotted, its timbers blackened with age. Inside the hollowed remains, bones lie intertwined. The man's long frame beside the smaller one of a woman. The grave goods shimmer faintly in the low light. Iron blades, amber beads, silver cups, a small comb made of whalebone. A runestone nearby reads, "Together in death as in life." A touching sentiment, if you forget that one of them might not have had a choice. You crouch at the edge of the mound, brushing away damp moss. In your mind, the burial comes alive. You see the ceremony unfold as it might have centuries ago. The chieftain's body dressed in armour, laid upon furs. The woman, his wife, or perhaps his captive, washed, adorned, and given a cup of something strong enough to dull her mind. Drums beat low as the crowd gathers. Some cry, some cheer. She's led to the ship, her wrists trembling in the lamplight. Whether she walks or is dragged, no one writes down. Fire and smoke take the rest. Historians still argue over these ship burials. The Arab traveller Ahmad ibn Fadlan, who witnessed one along the Volga in the 10th century, described a slave girl who volunteered to join her master in death. But was it faith, fear, or force? Some scholars say she was drugged or coerced. Others believe it was a sacred rite of devotion. Maybe both are true. The line between piety and punishment has always been thin when women are the offering. You imagine the quiet after the flames died, the blackened hull sinking into earth, sealing two lives into legend. Generations later, poets would call it love. Archaeologists would call it ritual. You, standing here centuries later, call it something else entirely. Erasure wrapped in honour. The woman's story, her fear, her thoughts, her final heartbeat, never carved in runes, never sung in halls. The dead man got his saga. She got silence. You take a handful of dirt from the mound and let it fall through your fingers. The grains cling to your skin like memory, like warning. Around you, the wind sighs through the grass, and for a moment you can almost hear them. The women who burned, who waited, who fought, who endured. Their voices overlap, soft, steady, rising with the wind until it sounds like prayer. You sit there a long time thinking about what worse than death really means. Maybe it isn't the pain or the loss or even the humiliation. Maybe it's being forgotten, your story told by the ones who conquered you. The Vikings built their glory on raids and runes, but the women they took built something quieter, survival that stretched through centuries, bloodlines that outlasted the fire. Even now their descendants walk the same cold shores, unaware that the sea remembers every scream it ever swallowed. As the sun slips behind the hills, you stand, brushing the soil from your hands. The grave looks peaceful now, almost beautiful. But beauty, like history, is a dangerous disguise. You turn toward the darkening fjord, the horizon glowing faintly with the last fire of the day, and whisper to the earth, "I remember you." It's not enough, but it's something. And in this world, remembrance is rebellion. The air grows still. The past settles like snow, soft, relentless, and full of ghosts. So now, as the night folds around you, let the images fade. The burning halls, the frozen shores, the faces half lit by torchlight, let them soften into something quieter. The women you met tonight, the ones history forgot, no longer scream. They breathe through time in quieter ways, in stories, in bloodlines, in the simple act of being remembered. You're safe here, far from that world of iron and fire. The only sound is the hum of your fan, the rhythm of your own breathing, the pulse of life still moving forward. Let your body sink deeper into warmth, into calm. The cruelty of the past can't touch you here. Take a slow breath. Let it fill you with something softer than memory, understanding perhaps. Exhale, and feel it leave your body like smoke from an extinguished torch. Somewhere, beyond this moment, history keeps whispering. But tonight, you've done enough. You've listened. You've remembered. Now close your eyes. Let the northern wind fade to silence, the sea grow still and drift into sleep.